Now let's take a look at how expectations influence the memories that we can create and how we construct meaning. And in particular, we want to take a look here at the study of Bransford and Johnson, 1972, Contextual Prerequisites for Understanding Some Investigations of Comprehension and Recall. And as the title suggests, there are two dependent variables that we are interested in here in the study. Number one, the ease of comprehension, and number two, the number of recalled elements. What happened, so the methods of this study, participants were allocated to 5 conditions. In the first condition, they only looked at they did not look at a specific picture, but they only heard a specific description. And I'll read that to you, or you can read it along in just a second. In the second condition, there was no picture, and they heard the description twice, so not only once. In the third condition, there was a picture shown after the description, and this picture had the correct configuration, so something that matched the description they heard. In the fourth condition, there was the picture shown before the description, but it didn't have the correct configuration, so it didn't actually match what was described. And lastly, a picture was shown before the description which fit the configuration of the description. So these were the 5 conditions, and now we can ask ourselves, how easy was it to comprehend for participants, and then also how much did they recall? So to give you a bit more detail, here is the story or the description that participants were confronted with. I'll give you a second and you can read along. So it goes like this. If the balloon popped, the sound wouldn't be able to carry since everything would be too far away from the correct floor. A closed window would also prevent the sound from carrying since most buildings tend to be well insulated. Since the whole operation depends on a steady flow of electricity, a break in the middle of the wire would also cause problems. Of course, the fellow could shout, but the human voice is not loud enough to carry that far. An additional problem is that a string could break on the instrument. Then there could be no accompaniment to the message. It is clear that the best situation would involve less distance. Then there would be fewer potential problems. With face-to-face contact, the least number of things could go wrong. So if we haven't seen the picture, this sounds kind of confusing. So let's take a look at the pictures that were shown to participants. On the left, you can see the correct configuration. On the right, the incorrect one. So this is about a person who is singing a song to someone who's in a window, far up, open window, and the sound box is transported using some balloons. You can see all the other bits of the description in this correct configuration picture. In the incorrect configuration, the picture doesn't fit that because the people are standing next to each other. The music box isn't in the right spot, and neither are the balloons. Now, I'd like to ask you, what are your expectations? What do you think happened? And what do you think, in which of the 5 conditions did participants have the easiest time comprehending the story? And in which of the 5 conditions could they recall the most elements from the story? Take a second to pause the video and formulate your own expectations. So now that you've formulated some expectations, let's take a look at the results. Here is the data. And what we can see is that we have the different conditions plotted along the x-axis. And in blue, we can see the comprehension, and in green, the recall, the number of items participants could recall. So comprehension, it's a little bit unclear how this is scaled. Let's just say from 0 to not understanding at all what's going on to 100 understanding well what is going on. And if we compare these conditions, we can see that in the no context condition, where participants only heard the description once, the comprehension is the lowest. People couldn't understand well. If they heard the story twice, that already improves understanding. and also seeing the context, the correct image after was an improvement as compared to no context. Partial context was similar to this, and then what really helped was seeing the context before. And for recall, we can see quite a similar pattern. So if we take the scale 0 to 10 as the number of items recalled, we can see that the clear difference is between whether people saw context before they heard the description and all the other conditions. So why is this the case? Well, seeing the picture, we could assume, would sort of activate a meaning framework in which some expectations are raised. So it creates expectations on how the incoming information that would then additionally come, how this could be understood. And this meaning framework can help organize this incoming information. So seeing the picture with incorrect configuration first wouldn't help, because this incorrect information doesn't help us organize our thoughts in a way that would be beneficial to improved recall and comprehension. This means here, this is an example for how encoding it means relating old information to new information and the other way around. So encoding means making sense out of the stream of incoming information in front of the background of what you already know. And that is why expectations are important in comprehension and recall. Let's take a look at another experiment that deals with the relation of memory and meaning, and again relates to expectations. And this time this is about person memory, and specifically about a study by Hastie and Kumar from 1979 that deals with how people organize personality traits in memory. So let me tell you about this experiment. Here is how it went. Participants read a text about a smart person that contained different types of information about behaviors that this smart person showed. Some of these described behaviors were consistent with expectations about smart people, or let's say stereotype consistent. So things like this person plays chess. Some other information was inconsistent with expectations, or let's say stereotypes. For instance, that this person would play bingo. And other information was just neutral. For instance, that this person would eat cheese. And then the dependent variable in this case was the proportion of behavior descriptions that participants could recall. And now I'd like to ask you to take a moment to think about what you think would happen. So what are your expectations? Which types of behaviors do you think people could recall the most? Now, maybe you think that participants recalled stereotype consistent or expectation consistent behaviors the most in this case. But that was actually not the case here. As you can see from this data, so we have the proportion of behavior descriptions recalled. So it could be either 100% recalled or nothing recalled. And then we have this listed for the 3 types of information that participants were asked to recall. So the congruent, the information congruent with the expectation, information incongruent with the expectation, and neutral information. And what we can see here is that the incongruent information had an advantage in being recalled. This was the type of information that was recalled the most. So you could say that we have something like selective memory going on here, where people filtered and focused on things that were surprising. And you could say that this might be done because it helps people to assess their environment more efficiently. Because the expected things, those are things that if you don't know, you might be able to make them up. But the incongruent pieces of information here, the information that's not consistent with our expectations, where expectations are violated, this might give you an edge if you are trying to predict the behavior of this person and all you know is that they're smart. And then one more piece of information, if it's the incongruent one, it would help you predict their behavior. Now, we could take different routes of trying to explain this finding that incongruent behavior has some kind of an edge in memory. And I think one of the simpler explanations takes this network approach, where if you think about a certain person, in this case it's James Bartlett, then you have a 50-50 chance, if we're just talking about a probabilistic search process. So just by chance, we either take congruent or incongruent or neutral information into account. Now, let's for now leave out the neutral information and only talk about congruent versus incongruent information. So if we only group information by these two things, and we have no other assumptions about why people might prioritize this or that type of information, then you would expect that each of these categories has an equal probability of being recalled, right? If there's nothing more going on than pure probabilistic search, purely by chance you either land at the congruent or the incongruent side, we should see that there's no advantage of incongruent information over congruent information. But there is. So this can't be the explanation for the way that memory is organized in this case. Another approach that we might take to trying to understand how memory is organized in this case would be a depth of processing explanation. So in this case, you could assume that how informative a piece of information is determines how deeply it will be processed. So if people will focus a lot of energy and resources on processing this piece of information, and then consequently whether they will retain it and will be able to retrieve it, because information that gets more processing attention, so to say, then also has better chances of being retrieved and first of all stored and then retrieved in memory. Now, what determines this informativeness? Well, we can think of a number of different factors. For instance, the serial position. If I read about a person eating cheese first, maybe this has because of the primacy effect, maybe this has an edge in my memory. I can recall it better, or it seems to be more informative. Therefore, I process it more deeply. Therefore, I am able to retain it better. This might also be the case for not just primacy, but also recency. So the last piece of information that I read about, let's say Albert Einstein, I might find that because of its position more informative, and therefore, and so on. Other factors that might influence the informative of pieces of information could also be the number of previously sampled similar behaviors. So if I've already read that this person plays chess and they play Go and they play bridge, maybe they also play other games that are either related to cards or boards. So any information that's related to board games or card games might have a higher informativeness value, and therefore, again, get more attention and processing, and then get more of a chance to be retained and retrieved. And the degree of incongruence with the current trait impression might just be one of these factors that inform how important a piece of information is. So if a piece of information is incongruent, it might be that it's therefore perceived as more important in this selective memory kind of way, and then receive more attention, and then again be retained and retrieved more with a higher likelihood. So this explanation fits rather well to the data that we've seen. But of course, you could just build the model the other way around as well. You could also say that similar behaviors, or that they might also have an advantage and should therefore get a bigger edge in processing and in retention than, let's say, neutral information. And we didn't find evidence for that, at least in this study. Here is another explanation, and this comes from the schema perspective. Of course, just to remind you, schema is basically a pattern of thought or a mental system of organizing information into a framework. And Here, so this is a kind of a similar approach. The idea is that there's information that is schema consistent, which is common. It's strongly related to information we already have and to the beliefs that we hold. And this is the type of information that we look for. So we assimilate. And this would be kind of a top-down processing way, in the sense that we are seeking out this information because we know there's something going on and we look for stuff that fits. Schema inconsistent information, however, is unusual, and therefore, by virtue of being unusual, captures attention. And it triggers sort of a deeper or like more elaborate way of thinking, accommodation, and therefore you could say it's kind of more like a bottom-up processing type of way. So instead of looking for this information, we stumble upon it, and because it is so strange or like inconsistent, because it is so inconsistent, it grabs our attention and therefore carries on into being processed more deeply. Now, if we take this schema explanation, we would think that the deeper or more effortful thinking mode that would be required to be able to accommodate schema inconsistent information in our belief system would require, that requires processing capacity. So if there is cognitive load going on, this information can't be recalled very well. Instead, under cognitive load, we would expect that people could remember consistent information better. However, if people have an accuracy motivation going on, it might be that they can remember more inconsistent information because they're trying to elaborate in their thinking. They're trying to be very careful. Yeah. So this is another perspective on how memory and meaning have an interaction, whether or not a piece of information fits into the kind of network we've already built, and whether or not we think it is very informative, to go back to this model. Those might be predictors for whether or not we're likely to retain it in memory and then to also retrieve it.